Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him.
Right, so it says his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, right? Because he's the top dog in the earth, right? I was reading an article the other day, and they were saying how, the behavior of Trump is unbecoming of the most powerful man in the world. So, other countries can say what they want to say, that they think they're the best and everything, but the world knows who's the top dogs and who's in charge. Right. And the ones that are in charge, I mean, it's not a racist thing for me to say that white people rule the world. It's the truth, right? That's just a statement of fact. It's an observation. You know what I'm saying? If the lion is the king of the jungle, right? I mean, am I being biased towards the lion? Right? Well, what about the hyenas? They do pretty good. They hold it down. You know what I'm saying? What about the African? And actually, the lion's not really the king of the jungle. The lions aren't in jungles. It's a tiger. But
right.
But you can you tell I watch a lot of nature shows? Right. But you get the point that I'm saying, right? So listen. So the white man rules the world. Let's talk about the white man. So read it from the top again.
Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him.
It says his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him. It's out of course. This is a man that lives by the sword, that is full of hatred, that is full of violence, right? And it's not the Arab man, okay?
Oh boy.
Because not all the Arabs, right? So we ain't even gonna talk about that.
No,
go ahead.
Let's keep going.
But the just shall live by his faith.
But it says the just shall live by his faith, right? So the just is dealing with the Israelites. We're the ones that will live by our faith and the measure of faith in keeping the commandments within us. But the evil person, the wicked person that rises up, this is what you see in them. This is what's made evidence. And then bring out what you want to bring out. Read that for him and break that down, because I think it goes perfect together.
Give me Isaiah 13 and verse 13. Isaiah 13 and verse 13. All right, because again, there's many scriptures that we learn when we come into this truth that don't really come to life for us until later on when we actually see these things play out. All right, verse 13.
This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 13, verse 13. Therefore, I will shake the heavens and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts and in the day of his fierce anger.
So this is speaking about the second coming of the Lord, right? When he comes and he brings vengeance back into the earth, he sets things back in order, all right? He sets up his kingdom on earth. This is a future prophecy, something that hasn't even taken place yet, all right? But this is talking about the destruction that is going to come here on the second coming of Christ. Read.
Verse 14, and it shall be as the chased rope.
It says, and it. Read verse 1 real quick.
Verse 1. The burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see.
So when you read verse 1, it's letting you know that the subject matter is referring to Babylon, which is Babylon the Great, America. Now read verse 14 again.
Verse 14, and it shall be as the chased rope.
So the it is referring to Babylon the Great. It's referring to the Edomites, or who the world so ignorantly calls Caucasian and all these other names that they've adopted throughout the years. But the Bible calls them Esau. It says they shall be as a chase roe, all right? Meaning a deer running for its life when that destruction comes. Read.
And as a sheep that no man taketh up.
Read on.
They shall every man turn to his own people and flee everyone into his own land.
So Esau has done this great, magnificent job of making us this big melting pot that when I first heard this, I'm like, it was difficult to see. It's not that I didn't believe it, because I could read slave ships and see that thing came to pass. It's evident. But it was hard for me to actually envision people turning back to their own place because we've been so mingled amongst each other. But then seeing things like this, when you have people chanting, send them back.
That's the thing. That's why I've said this about Trump. I actually love Trump because he's emboldened and he's put people out there where they felt like you might have not seen the sentiment. People were talking about, oh, you're delusional, racism doesn't exist, whatever. And it's crazy because they'll still try to tell you in their face that the things that are happening are not racist based. They're, based on whatever other BS excuse that they use. Right. But for me, that's powerful because it's not a mistake, right? When the scripture talks about that, the Most High sets up the basis of men to lead things. There's a rationale behind this. I've said this before on the show. To not that Obama ever did much for us, but he actually put a lot of people to sleep and say, oh, well, look, a black man can get elected. Right. But to then follow this black man with such a polarizing opposite, with somebody who, because, you would think that Trump would have the tact to kind of, play the game. And I think that's why some of his party be like upset with him. Like they're forced to draw party lines with him, but they're like, yo, this dude, like you're speaking too brazenly about the things that we only talk about in private. Like in little chambers where we're sharing cigars and stuff like that. This is when we talk about that stuff. You're being real open. And so I think it's good stuff for us to kind of latch on to. I mean, not obsess over it, because we understand that, okay, knowing this is one piece, now what? But I think it's a good way to show people that there still is a big racist problem, and that the racism doesn't start with us, because people say, oh, what about reverse racism and all this other stuff? No, you can't, that term doesn't make any sense. When you deal with racism, all right, so what if I don't like you? I have no power or authority to affect any type of oppression on you. So there's a difference in feeling a way about a certain race and being able to exert an influence to oppress them on it, and we've gone through this with the long-standing effects of slavery and all that other stuff. But anyway, I digress a little bit.
Real quick
time on that. Go ahead.
Trump becoming president, and like you said, being as brazen as he is, and he's able to say certain things, it activated what we read in Habakkuk, how they had that spirit within them to just be risen up.
Right.
Obama was president for 8 years, and then we were still this docile people. The only thing that we can lean on was the fact that we had a black president.
Right.
There was no action behind it.
Right.
So the whole thing about the reverse racism is 110% correct.
Cap, before we move on, can I grab this one script?
Go ahead, bro.
Because in the time period that we're living in right now, this is going to apply literally to every time we come on a radio show, every time the news is being brought out or whatever. It's the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3. It says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there be a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Like I brought out on the last show, every time you see brother or sister getting shot down in the streets, being kicked out of a Starbucks or whatever, the man that killed Eric Gardner, being basically exonerated and no federal charges being brought against him, is just showing you how that man of sin is being revealed.
Right. And understand something. Historically, I like how you brought that out. It's a continual thing. It wasn't one event that was going to show you who that man of sin was. When it talks about the falling away, because we went over this when I was going over the gospel class, parts 1 and 2, was the falling away, the biggest event that signified the falling away was the slavery, right? When it talks about the times like you've never seen before, right? Because there were many captivities, there were many other things, but the sheer amount of our people that died and tortured, I mean, and there's a lot of that just still hasn't come to light. And it's interesting because that'll kind of show you, because what we're talking about, what I'm going to talk about today, a lot of people don't know about that happened here in the United States between 1910 and 1920. But chiefly, you want to get really historical, that started with the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD.
Right.
And that was the falling away that Christ was prophesying about, that Paul was prophesying about. And that was the beginning of that man of sin being revealed.
That's right.
And so like what you said, and you bring it up to today, there's smaller events outside, right? So the two biggest was 70 AD, and then obviously 1492 and 1619 with the slave trade and the massacre of the natives over here. And those were the falling ways, and you started to see by these actions of this person who this son of perdition is. Who is this hellacious man, right? Because perdition is talking about hell. So telling you, this is the son of hell. This is the emissary of Satan, right? And people think you think that, and right away you think a freaking creepy exorcist movie. And no, it's what's I think it's more scary that it's a real thing.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like you're literally living the movie.
No. And that hell can touch you while you're alive, because this fallacy of hell being beneath and being this place that you go to when your soul burns, we know that hell is a condition, and hell is what we have experienced through these different falling away that you see historically that's happening. And like you said, with Trump, you're seeing the enabling of Esau, right, who the world English calls the white man, speaking up and speaking their minds and speaking their hearts, right? And the fact that, I mean, they interviewed people afterwards and people were like, no, I don't think it's racist. And, like nobody wanted to condemn him, I mean, one lady said, listen, this guy's like Teflon, like nothing could touch him. He's bulletproof. Like other presidents, it would have been such a scandal. Like, nah, this guy's bulletproof. But anyway, that's a good scripture about the son of perdition. That makes a lot of sense. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not sure how quick we'll get through it, but again, that's why it's the Power Hour. I think it's better. It works in a shorter format. So I want to talk about today. This article popped up. It's called La Matanza, right? Or the Massacre of Mexican-American citizens. I want to point that out. It was citizens of the United States, by and large. Not illegal aliens, nothing like that. And not that would necessarily justify it anyway.
Right.
They had papers.
In 1910 to 1920, so this is less than 100 years ago, right? Because we're in 2019, right? So I'll read about it real quickly, and then I'm going to start with an article before I go into the general piece, right? So hang on. Here we go. So it says La Matanza. La Matanza was a series of brutal attacks and lynchings. Yes, you color-based Israelites who say that the Northern Kingdom, that Mexicans ain't your people.
Right.
Mexicans were lynched also. All right. This is the series of brutal attacks and lynchings of Mexican ethnics. And what they mean by Mexican ethnics is that they were United States citizens.
Right.
So don't think your citizenship stands for anything. You see that with the prison system, with the school to prison pipeline, right? And I'm not talking about the criminals that deserve what they sow, all right? But I'm talking about that, I'm an American citizen. This stuff will never happen. It did, all right? And guess what? When those end times get closer, it's going to happen again.
That's right.
It says it was a series of brutal attacks and lynchings of Mexican ethnics by Anglo-Texans. That's hip talk to say Esau, the white man. All right? That took place between 1910 and 1920. So a lot of people probably know about it. Dum-dums. The Mexicans didn't go through what we went through.
Stop
blah,
it,
blah, blah.
fam.
Come on, be quiet.
Right.
In the midst of tension between the United States and Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, right? So this was going on during the Mexican Revolution. These violent acts and killings were committed by Texan vigilantes and law enforcement. The Texas Rangers. Have you heard about them? Not the
Yep.
baseball team.
Yeah.
Yeah, not Chuck Norris.
Not Chuck Norris. Right? These are the Texas Rangers. Including the Texas Rangers during their operations against what they called bandit raids, known as the Bandit Wars. Right? And if we have time, we'll talk about the Bandit Wars. Is the rhetoric and propaganda of the United States to counter this telling of it. And the reason the article that we're going to read was brought out was because I think it was very recently, it was in this century, meaning in the 2000s, that they actually finally erected a monument to it. Kind of like with Black Wall Street, where it wasn't acknowledged for a long time, but now they have the monument, right, to acknowledge it, so it's not something that they can't deny, So it is estimated that at least 571 lynchings of Mexican Americans took place between 1848 and 1928.
That's a lot.
20% of which occurred in the 1910s. However, in total, it is estimated, this is all estimated, that about 5,000 Mexican Americans were killed during this period. These acts of violence were previously thought to have been individual events with no connection to one another. More recently, historians have noted connections between these violent acts and have described them as interconnected parts of a period of anti-Mexican violence labeled by one group of historians as La Matanza of 1915. All right? So it's you're seeing that again now with this sentiment of the immigration. And listen, I'm not saying everybody come in. But they're in concentration camps down there.
Right.
You're seeing the manifestation modernly of is it Deuteronomy 28:32?
32.
All right. You're seeing that with the children being removed and taken from them. Okay. And listen, are all those people innocent? Are some criminals? Are some sure? Guess what? When the Pilgrims came here, the Indians didn't think they were criminals.
Nope.
And what did they turn out to be?
Criminals.
Lost everything. Freaking the original terrorist. Were those damn Pilgrims.
That's right.
Right.
Oh my goodness. What was it? The Mayflower? They came on the Mayflower?
Yes,
Is what
sir.
they say?
They said they came on the Jesus.
They came.
The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, and,
Right.
and the good ship Jesus.
Yeah.
So before I go back to that a little more historically, right? And I know maybe scriptures are popping in our head. We can bring them out in a moment. I want to read the article a little bit, right? So it says their ancestors were slain a century ago along the U.S.-Mexico border. They say now is the time to retell the horror. So this is just one family's telling of it. Okay, but what we read in the intro of what La Matanza was, we understand that it was, they estimated 5,000 plus 571 some odd lynchings. Gosh, you know what that is? How many lynchings a year is that? Bro, that's like one every week
Yeah,
for
right.
all those years.
Dang.
That's insane.
Maybe more, right? Because how many weeks is that? Oh, wait, so
How many-
no, I want to
How many-
do.
how many
it's
years was it?
52, right? So that's what I want to look at. Hold on, because I want to see this.
How many years was it?
48, 50, 60, 70, 90. Oh, wait, 18, 28, 30 years?
30 times 52 divided by 5. What?
571?
2.7.
Actually, almost 3 lynchings a week.
Yeah, 2.7.
For 30 years.
30 years.
3 lynchings a week for 30 years. And that's just the lynchings.
That's just the lynch.
That's not talking about what we're going to read about, how they killed these guys cold-blooded. Cold-blooded. Texas Ranger, the captain of the Texas Rangers in this region, shot these guys in the back after they had sought the Texas Rangers to help them with an issue that was going on. So, it says, from the sedan's back seat, Melba Cootie watched as the mesquite line flattening of South Texas rushed by. About a century ago, she explained, her family owned all this property as far as the eye could see. And we understand, cue up Lamentations 5 for me because this is so
Right.
important
Yeah.
because we talk about it historically, right? Lamentations 5, but I want to bring it to this here, and I want to bring it, well, you can't hear with those aren't earmuffs, they're mics, so you should hear us very clearly. He's trying to move them like, you see how it's in our spirit to like lie and just like so easy be like make excuses.
Dang.
My man was all up in his scriptures, you know what I'm saying? And he trying to adjust this like, oh, it's because I got these earmuffs on. No, you're not at the shooting range. These aren't noise dampeners. All right, they amplify the sound. Anyway, just have it ready for me, all right? So if I forget, I want to go over it. Lamentations 5:1. So it says, she says her family used to own all this land where they are, right? This is Hidalgo County in Texas. It says Christine Molis, her hands on the wheel, knew that already, of course. It was a critical detail of the story of her 76-year-old mother was about to retell. The story of what happened in this place. The single event that, in their view, altered the family's destiny. The narrative had always been there, in relatives' musings about what might have become of the family's wealth and influence, if not for the killings so long ago of hundreds of Mexican Americans by the members of the vaunted Texas Rangers who took justice into their own hands. So this was a wealthy Mexican American family, and they said they always look at that. If these killings didn't happen, we would have rose to prominence. Very much similarities to Black Wall Street, right? I mean, they were on their way to having a community like that, right? Because they had wealth and land. Back then, the land is what made you wealthy. This is why they ate it all up under Manifest Destiny, all right, during the 1800s. So, and this is why they talk about that the Irish came and they were subjugated and stuff. And yes, there was a lot of racism against Irish, but they were recruiting Irish people to come over because there was not enough white people to take the land.
That's right.
So while they saw them as lesser white people, they still brought them over with the promise of free land, giving away what was never theirs to give to begin with. All right. So it says the narrative had always been there in relatives' musings. Okay, I read that part. The saga, known as La Matanza or the Massacre, had recently crept onto the public stage with a push for historical markers acknowledging the slayings. This is what I was talking about. There was a push for Black Wall Street to do that, and they finally put it up. It's a very similar marker. You see the photo here. Matanza of 1915. I don't know if you could pull that one up in the article. Okay. This is what they mean by a marker. And if you look up the Black Wall Street marker, you'll see that too. So they wanted it to be acknowledged. Right. And listen, it's a small victory. It is an awareness, and that's good. In the bigger scheme of things, we understand that, without the whole picture of what we need to do with the Bible, that don't mean nothing. You know what I'm saying? They're like, sure, you, okay, yeah, we'll take that. But that was then. That's what they'll say. That was then. Right? Get over it. It says, along with the era's anti-Mexican rhetoric and unequal treatment of Americans of Mexican descent in the border region, its underlying elements also seem to be there in the latest headlines about securing the U.S.-Mexico border in the age of President Donald Trump. The militia group detaining migrants in New Mexico. This is now. They're not talking about then. This is shades of what was happening then. The U.S. citizens asked for ID when a border agent in Montana heard them speak Spanish. Like, so, you know, like when I was driving to San Diego, you pass by the 8, you pass by the border checkpoints, and I was telling my wife, I'm like, don't put no Spanish music, don't put no, I say, you know,
Yeah, I've made that mistake before.
Don't talk Spanish.
I've made that mistake coming back from Mexico before.
I said, if they ask you who the president is, don't go que.
Yeah, como?
That's what I did. I was like, Monday, and then they pulled us over for like 3 hours and just kept us.
Yep.
I'm joking. I was like 17.
So it says the humanitarian crisis faced by migrant children detained in Texas and Trump's own racist tweets insisting Democratic congresswomen of color leave the United States if they don't like his policies. The circumstances of the stories, then and now, are not the same, but all hinge on who's welcome in the United States and how to treat those who aren't. And for many descendants of those killed a century ago, the old stories, often ignored in textbooks, and unknown even by those with a firm grasp of U.S. history, may hold lessons for how to face today's challenges and ensure injustice doesn't again prevail. And that part, whatever, you know, that sounds like a freaking Superman line from like a movie or a comic book, you know, ensure justice doesn't again prevail, injustice doesn't prevail. Come on, man, get out of here with that nonsense. Look at what they said here. This stuff is ignored in textbooks, and even people who have a firm grasp of U.S. history don't understand. So a lot of that so it makes you kind of understand how ignorant a lot of our people are,
Right.
and you know, some of the other nations, and that's to a point, right? Because I say it's to a point because we know that racism piece is taught and stuff. This is how they could sit there and say, well, it's not a racist thing that's going on or whatever, without because they don't even acknowledge. Right? Like, that's a form of racism. That's a form of white supremacy. The fact that you don't even acknowledge that we have a history that's so tainted, I'm not even going to say tinged, with the oppression of our forefathers. And I'm not even talking about going back to biblical times. I'm talking about, look at this here. You know, talking about this stuff stopped in 1928. They were still lynching Mexicans in 1928. So, it says it's why so many who trace their lines back to the early of 20th century horrors want to share the details of what happened right here in the Rio Grande Valley. I tell my kids, Cootie said, as she guided her own granddaughter on what would be a pivotal day in the younger woman's understanding of the family history, I don't want them to forget this, right? Never forget. That's how it should be. But they want us to forget
Oh, yeah.
what happened to our people. So it says, okay, yeah, I'll start here. So there's a cemetery, right? So she says, dry leaves crackled underfoot and dogs barked in the distance as Cootie lifted the gate's metal latch. Stepping inside, the elderly woman laid out the crux of the generations-old tale. Here, on this very spot, Cootie's great-grandfather, Jesus Pasan, and her great-uncle, Antonio Longoria, was shot in the back and left to die on September 27, 1915. Pasan was 67 and Longoria 49. They were U.S. citizens and prominent landowners of Mexican heritage. They were prominent landowners, right? Longoria was a U.S. postmaster. So no, he wasn't a mail delivery guy. He was the postmaster. A certified school teacher, an elected Hidalgo County commissioner. So
He was a government official.
yes. Yes. And killed, no trial. Nothing. They never had a proper funeral. Just wait. Like, you know, so there's going to be a bunch of reading here, and then we'll probably hit the scripts at the end of this. And I don't even know that I'm going to get to all the different pieces. So maybe this will be the topic for next weekend, and we'll talk more about the bandit wars and the Mexican border wars and stuff like that. So it says Pazan, even in old age, was known to help area farmers translate Spanish agricultural terms to English. So he was helping people there in the region. The men had traveled that day to the Texas Rangers camp at a nearby ranch to report some stolen horses, Cootie said. Repeating the story she learned as a girl and one now authorized by the Texas Historical Commission. So what they mean by that it's authorized is that they acknowledge it now. So until they've acknowledged it, it's just
didn't
you
happen.
telling a story. It didn't happen. But the reason I bring it out, because people need to cosign. This is cosigned by the white man that this happened. This ain't some BS, somebody telling a story that they just heard and remembered. So it says the conversation at the Sam Lane Ranch also included talk of so-called Mexican bandits. Excuse me, a crude reference at the time to anyone whose roots trace south of the border. So basically, if your ethnicity was from down there, even if you were a U.S. citizen, they were calling everybody bandits, right? So again, proverbs, bywords, right, of our people. And mind you, one of these guys was a government official, a postmaster, certified teacher,
Right.
right?
That's what Esau does everywhere. Like when we invade these other countries, it's like, okay, they're all terrorists.
Yeah.
When it's just common people living in like villages and things like that.
Yeah,
It's the same exact
it's a
thing.
white person that does something and he's a mentally ill person.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Setting up the narrative
Right.
of sympathy.
Right.
Right. So it says the conversation at the Sam Lane Ranch also included talk of so-called Mexican bandits, a crude reference at the time to anyone whose roots trace south of the border, recalled Roland Warnock, then a 19-year-old cowboy at the ranch, in the 2004 documentary Border Bandits. So I want to look this documentary up and see how it jives with everything that I was reading. It says CNN was unable to reach descendants of the ranch's owners, so they wanted to talk to the people where the Texas Rangers were set up. Bazan and Longoria left the ranch on horseback, the state records show. So they went to the Rangers to file a report that there was missing horses. The Ranger said, okay, we'll follow you back. We'll investigate. Texas Ranger Captain Henry Ransom and 2 civilians followed them in a Ford Model T. At some point along the road, a firearm barrel emerged from one of the car's windows. The gunman aimed at Bazan and Longoria, still riding up ahead. He pulled the trigger. The men's bodies hit the ground. Their horses galloped away. The Model T drove off. Unfazed by the shooting, the official narrative goes. This is the official narrative. It was reported that Captain Ransom returned to the campsite to take a nap. And then, you see a picture here. These aren't Texas Rangers, but you see did you put the picture up of the Texas Rangers? And these are dead Mexicans. There's ropes tied to corpses. So they were already dead, and they would like drag the bodies around and stuff like that.
Typical Texas style. That's Texas style.
Right. So you see the picture there of these guys dead, and they called them bandits, right? So it says the killings came at a time of turmoil in Texas as the Mexican Revolution seethed to the south and Europe crept toward the World War I. Mexican Americans in the U.S. border state had staged a short-lived revolt against new, non-Hispanic settlers who saw prominent landowners of Mexican descent as inferior. So basically they're saying white people. There was a little revolt against white people that were trying to push them out. Go back, send them back to their country, right? Texas governor in the early 1910s had sent to the Rangers to the border region, ostensibly to broker peace, but it wasn't to be. By 1916, hundreds of untrained Rangers patrolled the state, often reigning with terror and intimidation. They were assassins with a badge, said historian Trinidad Gonzalez, who counts a relative among those murdered during the era. During this time in South Texas, anyone who looked Mexican was racially profiled as a crime suspect, said Monica Munoz Martin. I'll tell you,
sounds real familiar.
right? Israel and Judah were pressed together.
Right.
Right?
Real familiar, fam.
A Brown University assistant professor who wrote about the period in her book, The Injustice Never Leaves You. That meant that whether you were an American citizen or an ethnic Mexican, you didn't have the protection or the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And that sounds very much like today with the way we are
Absolutely.
policed. With the way we are policed as a people. It says when ethnic Mexicans had encounters with police, it was very common that people disappeared. Those who vanished often turned up dead, their bodies left to rot. The custom was used to intimidate, to incite terror, and to discourage families from seeking investigations or prosecutions, Martinez said.
That sounds like Mississippi.
It all fueled a culture of impunity. You got something you want to bring out? I see you bring it out.
All right. Yeah.
Bring it out, brother. Bring it out. Bring it out. I don't want to quench that spirit. Bring it out.
All right.
Right.
The book of Zechariah, chapter 11 and verse 4. Thus saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter, whose possessors slay them.
Who possessors slay them? Who's our oppressors? The so-called white man. They're the ones that put us to slavery. They're the ones that's killing us to this day, even in the past. Lynching, police shooting, Texas rape, burnings, all that. Go ahead, read.
And hold themselves not guilty.
Not guilty. They hold them not guilty.
The word in the article for that is impunity.
Impunity. Yep.
Impunity. You know what? That's not a common word, so I'm gonna look it up. Hold your thought. All right,
Bring
so we
it
can share that
out.
with people. All right. Impunity.
We need some more sound effects.
Exemption from punishment or freedom from the injurious consequences of an action. Immunity. Indemnity. Exemption from punishment, freedom from punishment, license, amnesty, pardon, reprieve, carte blanche. That's what they call
Carte
it. Carte
blanche.
blanche. Carte blanche.
Carte blanche. Carte blanche.
Privilege is one
Yeah,
of the
that's the
synonyms.
word. Privilege.
Privilege.
Mm.
White
That's
privilege. Read it again.
Go ahead.
Whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty.
That's white privilege. That's impunity. They stopped going to the cops for help because they would disappear
Right.
and then turn up dead in the freaking plains of Texas. Bodies rotten. Bro, the Bible's a true book.
It is.
Yeah.
The Bible is a true book. And this isn't thousands of years ago. This isn't hundreds of years ago. All right? You're talking about 80 to 90 some odd years ago
Right.
that this was going down.
Hey, it tells you that it was so recent they had cars that were following behind them.
Yeah, they said it was a Ford
That's
Model T.
ridiculous.
So you know there was
Yeah.
automobiles
Right.
at this time.
That's a relatively new thing in the earth.
Right.
So
Right.
it's insane.
The crazy part is though that these scriptures were written thousands of years ago, but yet it's telling your story, 100 years ago, even up until today. And
That's the power of them scriptures, man.
It
And
is.
that prophecy.
That's the script I wanted to bring out.
Go
It's
ahead.
Romans 15:4. It says, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime
That's right.
were written for our learning,
Right.
that through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope." That's because, again, these scriptures are our past, our present, and our future. All we have to do is learn our history according to what these scriptures say, and we'll be a lot better off.
Give me Deuteronomy 28:46, I think I want.
All right.
Let's go to the Dude.
Let's
The
go to
book of
dudes.
Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 46. And they shall be upon thee.
And the day that they're talking about are the curses. Actually, start a verse up.
Verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon
So
thee.
this is the subject matter. That's the day when we read verse 46. It says, all these curses shall come upon thee. Come on.
and shall pursue thee.
And shall pursue thee. Meaning what? How does something that's not a thing, right? That's not something that has legs or can walk, pursue thee? Meaning that it will always be on our people. It will always be with you. This wasn't a one-time thing for those detractors that try to say that all this was fulfilled already in biblical times. Yes, it was. But guess what? Just like you read in Romans, it was a continual thing. It was not just to be for one time. All right? That's like the Thessalonians. The falling away was not a one-time event. All right. This is why Christ in Matthew 24 said these will be the beginning of those things, because yet more will come. Come on.
And overtake thee, till thou be destroyed.
Till thou be destroyed. What? To be destroyed as a people. People want to say, oh, you guys are adding. You say destroy. Listen. Is real clear when you read the whole thing what it's talking about. Because when you pair this with verse 37, when it talks about proverbs and bywords, that's telling you that means you will not know who you are as a people.
Right.
All right? It's not just nigga spit coon that they say all that. Hopefully they don't freaking tick me off Facebook for that. I forgot that. We got to be extra careful.
Oh, we can't use the words.
No, you can't use the words. You got to be careful.
No N-bombs.
All right? So, it's not the N-word, all the derogatory terms. The mere fact that we're calling ourselves outside of Israel. Not just that we're calling ourselves Puerto Rican, African-American, but if you're Smith, if you're Comas, if you're John Well, if you're Clark, all right? Or Williams, all right? Rivas,
Man.
Gonzalez, okay?
McDowell.
Whatever it is.
Contreras.
McDowell. Good? Contreras? Right?
There we go. All right.
Cut them up.
Even if you have those are bywords too. Go back
That's
to
right.
where I had you.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed.
Till we be destroyed as a people. Right? Come on.
because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God.
And the reason, you got to understand something, there needs to be accountability. I was watching a funny little thing. I'd say it's funny, but I thought it was a joke, but it was serious. And there's like a guru, because it's like an Elamite guru, right? Like, so a friend had put it up, and like this girl asked a question about like battling her inner self. And he actually said some interesting things that's biblical, right? So, and basically at the end of it, he said, listen, what's the worst thing that's ever happened to you that life has done to you? And he asked the audience, how many of you have been stabbed? And nobody raised their hand. He goes, so the worst thing life has done to you, for most of you, is probably get bit by a mosquito. He goes, anything else that you're dealing with, it's because of you.
Damn.
Right. Damn.
He goes, it's because of you and how you act and your actions and that inner self. He goes, whether you want to call it the God voice, the devil voice. He gave some Elamite terms, I guess, for the same deities. He goes, but it's all you. He goes, and what you need to do to overcome that is start with the accountability that you're the master of that. You're in control of that.
Examine yourself.
Examine yourself. And when you examine that, this scripture's telling us here, it's because of what we did these things happen. Yes, the Most High put it on us, but we were the catalyst that made that stuff happen. That's why I say Esau is the damn devil the Bible speaks of. All right? But we deserve that. This is how that son of perdition
Right.
came.
We earned it.
Right? We earned it. But the Lord is not unjust that he has it worked in there that, hey, there's a judgment for them for all that. Right?
Right.
Come on, read.
To keep his commandments and his statute, which he commanded thee, and they shall be upon thee
And these curses will be upon you, Israel. Come on.
for a sign and for a wonder.
For a sign and for a wonder, because it's an astonishment sometimes when we think about the things that have happened to us, right? When we went through the numbers with the lynchings, I mean, even and you're talking about men that are somewhat learned here, that have an understanding of history, and it still kind of amazes us when these little tidbits and facts come out, right? It says it would be an astonishment and a wonder. Come on.
And upon thy seed forever.
And that's the part that I want. It says that these curses will be upon our seed forever. The seed is your future generations. So to say that these curses, no, you're applying historical things to some, you're just looking for identity in the scriptures. No, our identity is in the scriptures.
It is the scriptures.
All right? That is our identity. That's our history book. Because y'all took that. Just like you can't say this history, they said. Even if you have a firm grasp, I would have never come across this if not for the damn article.
You know what's heavy, Captain? What this article was talking about, how they're afraid to talk to the police, right? That's happening now. They're look. If
Well,
somebody
that's the point. That's why Brother brought out Romans 15, because it
Right.
makes you think of that, you know?
Well, like, think about the whole ICE thing. A lot of so-called Mexicans, so-called Hispanics, if somebody gets shot or stabbed or cut or whatever, they're afraid to go to the hospital.
Yo no sé.
They're afraid to call the police, or if they getting robbed, 'cause they don't know if they're going to get deported or get put in them cages.
That's right.
This is happening still to you guys.
Yes, it is. It is. All right. It's heavy, man. It's heavy. So it says here, it is estimated that hundreds, possibly thousands of Mexican Americans and Mexicans were killed during the years of La Matanza. Reads a state marker now planted along Interstate 69 near San Benito, Texas. So, the Wikipedia article said, 5,000. They said 571 lynchings. Don't get those numbers confused. They said thousands of Mexican Americans and Mexicans. So meaning U.S. citizens of Mexican ethnicity and obviously non-U.S. citizens, right? It says some 300 deaths happened in the Rio Grande Valley during the late summer and early fall of 1915 alone, estimated Gonzalez, a history instructor at South Texas College. Among the slain were Bazan and Longoria. When their empty saddled horses arrived to Cootie's great-grandmother's ranch house, her family knew something had gone horribly wrong, but they were too afraid to push the issue, Cootie said. Her great-grandmother, Epimenia Trevino de Bazan, never claimed the bodies. That was so painful for my family, Cootie said. In the humid South Texas heat, the remains of Bazan and Longoria festered. This is the other scripture you brought out. Right?
The
Read it again.
carcasses.
Read it out. Read it
26.
again.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 26. And thy carcasses shall be meat unto all fowls of the air.
Yeah, because what happens? The vultures come down, right? And
Scavengers.
the scavengers come down and they start to pick apart the bodies. It says that in the humid South Texas heat, the remains of Bazan and Longoria festered. Come on.
And unto the beasts of the earth, And
Right?
no
And
man
what
shall
happens? These coyotes, foxes, whatever, they're gonna come and scavenge the body. Come on.
and no man shall fray them away.
And no man will fray them away. And this is what happens. She says they never claimed the bodies. It says the remains of Bazan and Longoria festered. And this is just two people that we have an actual account from the
of.
family. When we go into it, Lord's will, next week on the deeper, broader sense, I wanted to start with the more personal side of it, and then open it up so that, because some people, they'll just cling on and, well, that's just an account of two people, like that justifies it,
Right,
even,
right,
right?
right.
But we'll go broader in it, and it says after 2 days, the stench of their decomposing corpses became unbearable, Warnock recalled. Now, remember, Warnock was one of the descendants of somebody near the ranch where the Texas Rangers were. He says, we couldn't hardly sleep on the ranch because of the smell, he said in the documentary. Human scent is the worst scent in the world. Warnock buried the men's bodies on the morning of September 29th, 1915, not because he felt some sense of remorse,
They were
sympathy, or honor. It was stinky. Because it took them 2 days to then say, hey, let's bury these bodies.
Yeah, they were decomposing all that time.
2 days after their death, etched into their headstones, one of which remains at the plot, while the other looks to have been replaced with a newer slab. So all they did was just put a date. There's no names, nothing, just a date. More than 100 years later, Mola stood over those graves in the cemetery along the country highway. These men had starred in her family tragedy for as long as she could remember. But until now, she'd been separated by place and time from their violent demise. It's overwhelming, she said. I didn't realize this is the spot they were killed. And we got a photo there. It shows her standing at this little kind of, it's just dirt on the side of the road. It's not even like a real cemetery plot.
Yeah.
It happened so many years ago, but it still brings sadness and grief, her mother said. She walked toward the cemetery gate, lifted its metal latch, and stepped toward the car. Back in the driver's seat, Molas continued down the lane toward the church her once affluent family owned and shared with its ranching neighbors. So they owned churches, they owned, right? Laying eyes on the one-room chapel, tears started to streak Cootie's cheeks. The structure's roof had caved in. Its leaning steeple showed fissures. Molas put an arm around her mother, who suffers from diabetes. Did she need food or water, the daughter asked. She said, I'm okay. If her great-grandmother had claimed Bazan and Longoria's remains, Cootie's family would have held a funeral at this church, she said. The entire community would have gathered to honor the dead in the Catholic tradition. So, they were Catholic. That's a very common thing amongst Northern Kingdom. All right? It says they didn't even get to see the bodies. Someone just told them this is where they buried, maybe a week later. Bazan and Longoria didn't get caskets, Cootie said. They weren't issued death certificates. No wake, no last rites. This was a government official, a U.S. postmaster. These were upstanding, wealthy landowners that went to the police to report a crime that was committed against them with the theft of horses. No last rites, no death investigations. There was no prosecution, no jury trial, no justice. Still, their loss doesn't live only in regional lore. Both men's names appear on a pair of key documents obtained by CNN, a record held in the U.S. National Archives titled Partial List of Mexicans Killed. So they don't even consider them, at least Paul, he was like, hey, I'm a Roman citizen.
Right.
It says in the Rio Grande Valley in 1915, and one from Mexico's Enaro Estrada Historical Archives. And look at the rhetoric, look at the propaganda. The U.S. National Archives calls it Partial List of Mexicans Killed. The Mexican Archives calls it the Partial List of Mexicans Murdered by the Rangers. And which one is more true? I mean, obviously, right? I mean, that's a rhetorical question, but which one is more true? That's why I always say history is told from the perspective of the victor.
That's right.
And that's why, they have a little saying where it says that's why it's his story.
That's right.
And there's more sides to history than just what's put out there. And you can't just take everything at face value. The lie of Columbus is one of the biggest ones that was perpetrated to us.
Right.
Yep.
That he's a great man and this, that, and the other. The reason behind the Civil War. And they try to put slavery at the forefront of it. That wasn't the primary driver in that.
No, it was money.
Right? So it says their description as Mexicans reflect the era's bigoted vernacular, not a declaration of citizenship. It's that proverb and that byword that we read. Actually, go to Deuteronomy 28:37. Let's read it real quick.
The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 37. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations.
Among all nations. That's everywhere we go. They have a word for us. They have a way to deny our identity. They do it to us today when we profess that we're Israel, when we bring out the proof according to the Holy Scriptures. And people, your own people can't stomach it. Y'all ain't no Israelites. Come on, read it.
Whither the Lord shall lead thee.
But don't forget that part, that accountability, whither the Lord shall lead us. That's that internet?
Yes, sir.
It says their description as Mexican reflect the era's bigoted vernacular, not a declaration of citizenship. Most people at the time were too afraid to speak out against the violence. But in 1919, Texas lawmaker J.T. Canales faced down death threats against himself and his family and led a joint state, House, and Senate investigation into the Texas Rangers. At the time, Canales, who represented the Brownsville area, was the only Texas state legislator of Mexican descent. More than 1,600 pages of testimony from dozens of people, including officers, landowners, and attorneys, make up the most complete set of evidence historians cite when referencing the extrajudicial killings of Mexican Americans at this time in South Texas. So here's another fancy word to say operating outside the law. They were above the law.
They were the real bad.
They held themselves not guilty. It's extrajudicial killings. They were not officially sanctioned. All right. There's a part here. I don't want to skip through it. We might have to get to it. Okay, no, we're almost there, so I'm going to read it. So remember what I said about extrajudicial killings? And I said seemingly outside the law. They're trying to say the Rangers acted on their own. All right, it's never really the case, right? Just like the crack epidemic in New York was a calculated plant for it. The influx of cocaine and heroin into the United States was a calculated way for the CIA to make money so that they can buy more arms, right? So it says, the findings reveal a bitter culture among some of the state's lawmen. Many of the men of the Ranger Force pride themselves in their reputation of being quick with their guns and desiring to have the reputation of bad men rather than faithful and efficient officers of the law. The legislature's joint investigative report found the probe also expressed crimes of the highest order. We find that some of the commanding officers are responsible for the gross violation of both civil and criminal laws of this state. The report stated, lawmakers cited offenses including extrajudicial killings, murders, confiscation of firearms without warrants, and incarceration without due process. One witness, E.A. Sterling, testified that then Governor James Ferguson, listen good, because they said these were extrajudicial killings, meaning they were not sanctioned by the government. But the governor, James Ferguson, told Ransom, which was the guy that shot the Bazang and Longoria in the back, the ranger captain linked to the killing of them, instructions to go down there and clean up that mess. That thing had been going on long enough, and to clean it up, if he had to kill every damn man connected with it. Cool. Added Ferguson, according to Sterling, I have the pardoning power, he told them, and we will stand by those men. And I want the power to hold themselves not guilty. And I want the bunch, that gang, cleaned up. Ferguson later was impeached on matters unrelated to the Rangers. We're running out of time. We got like maybe 30 seconds left on the radio side. Bro. So any final thoughts on this? We're going to follow up on this next week because I think this is a real, in the perspective from learning, it's like a good piece of little history that's kind of unknown. And it's a broader thing that really happened. So it's not just the isolation of these two individuals that we're speaking on. So anybody got anything else? Okay, all right, yeah. If he could post that link, I'd like to look at that and take a look at the documentary. It looks, they mentioned that there was a couple books on it and stuff like that. So, I mean, hey, listen. I know the way Northern Kingdom rolls sometimes, and it's so stiff neck and everything. I know some Southern Kingdom, even amongst us, they may never say it here in IURC. I know they have some issues and things like that. Listen, you got to subject yourself to the Holy Scriptures, man. And our histories are the same. And they may have happened at different eras. They may have happened at different times. And, we were in captivity together. And we're in this last captivity together.
That's right.
We in this together. And, we need 12,000 from each tribe.
He didn't say everybody.
Yeah, so that we can make sure that we can band together and do what we got to do. We got to put them differences aside, man, and come under this standard, under this banner in the Scriptures, man, and make things happen. So
that's right.
ACS. Yes. All right. Well, that's the Power Hour.
Yeah.
Native, Latin, and Black biblical topics. Make sure you like, share, and support. And with that, we say shalom.
Shalom.
We used to scream Black Power. while Heron was pushed. But at the end of the day, nothing's in vain. IUIC has been given a vision. The tents of Judah has risen. Many has attempted the mission, minor murmuring, omitting, and missing the mark. Just reading that he had the flame of fire in his eyes gave us the spark. We on Paul's mission. We out on the road, purple and gold, from Mexico, Cuba, Haiti, Ghana, Sierra Leone. 144,000 boots banging, concrete crackling. These are our men repented at heart. The scriptures is proof. IUIC, we deliver the truth.